Thank you very much, Colette. And I'm aware that it's already 4 o'clock, which is time for leaving, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. My presentation comes in two parts. I'm going to try and explain in a nutshell why we're doing this, and then to go through the 6 recommendations that we have really quickly. They echo many of the things that you've heard already today, so many of them will need little elaboration, but if you do need to look behind them, our policy proposals are in your conference pack. The starting point for the strict conservationists is always the international charters, and there's one special sentence in the charter that deals with towns, the Washington Charter from Icamos, and it talks, in addition to all of those things about bricks and mortar buildings, streetscapes, it talks about the various functions that towns and urban areas have acquired over time as being part of what's special about them. And that's a form of intangible heritage. And that sense of the things that people do in towns being important is where we started from with this urban policy and these proposals. We know this is a live issue in Ireland. This is a picture of a protest from 18 months ago outside Leinster House about Garda stations and post offices. And a very heartfelt and emotional quote from a rural TD, Jackie Healy-Rae, talking about the small things that matter in daily life in towns, the functions in a town. And that's our starting point. That's where we feel there's common cause between an economic development strategy and one that looks at heritage values. Someone said, the quality of our analysis determines the quality of our actions. We'll do what we can imagine, what we understand, and that's a question about values. And it's important that all of the perceptions that we have had today, all of the different presenters who've shown us things about towns that are important to them, whether it's shopping, buildings, people, the processes that are involved, the way towns fit into the economy, the rural economy. We think they're the important starting points, and understanding those is the way you build a good policy. Tara said to me earlier, is this a policy we can put our support behind? Is this the one that's going to crack the nut? So we've made one attempt to try and figure out what are the few things that it's necessary to do to make our towns live again. And I'm going to go through those now. This is the list. So when you see number 6, we're finished. All right? Stay awake, please. In the first instance, we're building on the work that the Heritage Council has done, in particular in the Irish Walled Towns Network, but also through the Historic Towns Initiative, and also through all the grants that we've given over the years to community groups and to help strange actions, innovative actions where people try to take care of the heritage that they themselves have identified and want to enjoy and take care of. We've done Heritage Week. We've established a constituency of 400,000 people who are passionately committed to heritage in Ireland. Our first proposal is that this gets built into a network, one that we're able to do, one that's built on the one that we already have, one that's built into every local authority in the country through our Heritage Officers Network where we are already, and which does a few key things. It helps people to help themselves. We know that people are well capable of doing these things. It channels and directs the energy that local communities have without exploiting them, but taking the energy that people have and will put into their buildings, their towns. It'll organise at the local level and help to foster long-term thinking in relation to towns and villages. And that's a very important point. It's come up a few times already today. And the Heritage Council's expertise, probably because we're so small, is in making connections and seeing problems holistically and getting different types of players together to solve these problems so that things are done with different types of energy, whether it's tourism or local economic development or straight conservation, that we can make these work in harmony because we've proven that we can do it through the work in the Irish Wall Towns Network. And we hope that these local stakeholders will have their impact in the planning process, which we've heard about today, and which is so important to shaping the way our towns are, through the planning decisions that are made in and of themselves, but also initiatives that get built into development plans in relation to public realm, in relation to retail strategy, in relation to tourism, and, oh yeah, heritage and heritage conservation. There are 28 towns that we already have. We want to grow that. And this is an example of the way people interact and learn about the places that they love. This is a ringing of the walled city of Derry on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, a child becoming interested and fascinated in something that comes out of the ground, an archaeological artefact, maybe a piece of pottery from 1,000 years ago. Becoming interested, maybe fascinated with the past. The second thing that we're calling for is an urban policy. We think the government needs to state what it thinks towns are for. And that's not just about heritage, it's about all of the things that the government does and how they impact on towns. We think this is very important in advance of the national planning framework that's forthcoming. And we think we need to move away from the picking of gateways and hubs, and we need to recognise what Orla has said earlier: 1/3 of the Irish electorate, 1/3 of the Irish population live in towns. They don't live in big cities, they don't live in the countryside. So towns are important, and we'd like the government to say what they think it should, our towns should do for us, for our society, for our economy. The third thing that we think that towns need is financial support. I remember Liam O'Brien, the town clerk in Youghal, saying that they would do anything necessary in terms of processes to help the Historic Towns Initiative to work. But he said the bottom line was, we need financial support. Cross our palm with silver. Building owners know this. We know it from the way that our grants are multiplied out when given out by extra support that's harnessed through this small and modest giving. Support is needed. It needs to be financial support. We were looking at the Living City tax incentive yesterday, which is for the big cities. We had representatives from, I think, 5 of those cities sitting around the table discussing whether or not this proposal would work and what could be done to make it better. And we're going to take that discussion and the deliberations about that, which were really brilliant, very positive, and turn them into a critique. It's been suggested to me that it may not be too late yet to have an influence on the Finance Act 2016 in relation to this. We'll try and do that. But more particularly to ensure that an incentive like this is rolled out for our towns, so that our towns can be places where people live and that there's a small incentive to do so. That's a quote about how the individual owner may benefit from a tax incentive, but that's because the collective also benefits, and sometimes the focus needs to be on the individual owner. Our policy proposals are trying to connect across with all of the research and the recommendations carried out by Teagasc and turned into the CEDRA report, that Commission for the Economic Development of Rural Areas. The top thing that Pat Spillane said when he launched that report was that we need to break down the silos. We need to get government departments cooperating. Now, the Heritage Council is only an agency, a small agency, but we're trying to put that into action by cooperating with Teagasc, sharing an agenda with it, saying that the towns are an intrinsic part of what should happen to make rural Ireland better. And we think that there is an urban focus for that, just as Professor Cathal O'Donoghue indicated this morning in statistical terms. And a quote that came out of one of their papers: in small towns, community development is economic development. They're the same thing. And in this particular example from Feathered in County Tipperary, you can see some fairly gloomy buildings, but there's a cafe in there at the ground floor level, and that's a place where people go after Mass on a Sunday. every other day of the week to have a good lunch. It's a bright light in the town. That's the type of thing that we want to happen. Around the corner in Feathered is another shining example. There is a Feathered Heritage Society. I see Terry here in front of me, who's a member. But the Feathered Heritage Society has got a sibling organisation, the Feathered Business and Tourism Group. So this deliberation on heritage spawns other initiatives, some of them which have an economic aspect to them. In this case, they've taken the former town hall, they've taken it off the county council, they've got leader money for it, they've got some money from Minister Alan Kelly, and they've got money from John Magner down the road as well to turn that into a visitor centre and a place that you can come to in Feathered to appreciate its history, its medieval history, which is fascinating, but also to spend a little money in the town as well. So this is how heritage thinking can eventually transform into things that matter for the local economy. Local retail matters as well. This is a picture of that circle being square, Tara, the old shop with the parking outside it. And you've seen this slide before, I'm afraid, from Grania's presentation about how we maybe have to crack eggs to make an omelette. Sometimes we may have to give up some of our sibboleths in conservation, the preciousness of the ancient Burgage plot, which does have historical significance, but if our towns are dying, maybe we have to do a bit of give and take and allow cars to get close to towns so the shops can be there and those shops will keep the town alive. We've heard it many times today already. The role of the local authority is so important. As the local representative of government, a source of funding, resources, a source of control and regulation through planning as well. Their support is crucial when looking at towns, and in particular in this era after our town councils and urban district councils have been abolished. We've outlined, I think, today many ways in which new approaches can be made to support the towns and to ensure that they continue to function and thrive in their economic roles, and also that their character can be maintained. This is a sad example here in Kilkenny of some buildings that have fallen derelict and which are in the Living City area. If those buildings are to be re-inhabited, an investor who may not be a property developer but who may want to just live in a nice house, an owner, they need to know that the place that they're going to buy and invest in is going to be a good place to live for 10 years. That's the cycle of 2 development plans. So we're back to long-term visions about how places can work, how they can support people living, and a commitment to that through all of the different vagaries of policy that local authorities implement, that they're implemented coherently to support that idea of people living in towns again. You can see I'm on number 5. It includes things like living over the shop. We've talked about it before. Many good examples have been given earlier on today. It is a problem. It's a difficult one, a regulatory problem to try and address. I've asked Orla, as she pointed out, to talk about small houses and the challenges that are associated with re-inhabiting them as well. But I think we should start with the positive. Every town has historic character, it has assets, it has resources. And as Pat was saying there in relation to North Main Street and the other areas of special character in Cork, begin by appreciating what we have. In this particular study, funded under the Government Policy on Architecture, Offaly County Council did a whirlwind tour of 3 or 4 of its smaller towns and plotted out vacancy and use in the town of Banagher and Edenderry and Dangan in County Offaly. And they produced these very visual, very immediately understandable diagrams that show opportunities. I'm not sure if my colleague Alison, our planning officer in the Heritage Council, is here, but she made a kind of a genius remark, I think, that ought to be repeated. We should be zoning space, not land. And when you look at a drawing like this, that becomes really clear why we should be doing that. We have this resource, someone mentioned earlier, 30% of our upper floor space is vacant. We can make use of that resource if we're clever enough and committed enough to making our towns work. I'll talk about the evening economy and why an image like this is a little striking when we think about Ireland. Lights on in a shop after dark, after 5:30. Sorry, lights on in a house. And can we have more of that? Livelier streets in the evening because our towns are inhabited. All of these ideas, and again this has been mentioned earlier today, are part of an international framework of good practice in relation to how our towns are managed because of their heritage values. And it should be part of our planning system. We should be trying to mainstream these heritage protection perceptions in our planning system. So my final point is that we should be paying attention to our towns continuously. This is one stab at what can be done with towns, what are the priorities, what are the things that are needed. Let's invest in research in our towns and ensure that we know what we're doing, that we're listening to the feedback on what works and what doesn't work, and that we change our policies accordingly. So there are the 6 recommendations. Again, they're in your pack, written in a different order, with a little bit of evidence and discussion to back them up. And we hope that you'll take them away from here and support us in advocating for them in all the different ways that we can do so. So thank you very much.